Hey everybody, Corey here, coming at you with another knife review. Today we are taking a look at the Cheburkov Knives Scout. If you're new around here, consider subscribing. Try to put out knife-related content on a regular basis first and foremost. Let's start with some size comparisons. Here it is next to the Ontario Knives Rat number 2, and you can see right away that this is a relatively large knife. I believe the blade length is stated to be approximately 3.9 inches. Next up, let's take a look at it next to the ProTech Knife Malibu. Again, kind of in that Rat 2 realm, and it is dwarfed by the Scout. Next up, let's take a look at it next to the PM2. Getting closer, bigger than the PM2, but getting closer in terms of overall size. Next up, let's take a look at it next to one of its littler brothers, the Cheburkov Knives Small Strish. Working on my Russian there. Don't give me too much crap for that. And then last but not least, let's take a look at it against another knife in this general price range and size range, the Chris Reeve Knives Large Sebenza. So without further ado, let's get into the review, and that rhymes. Let's talk about this knife as a user. In terms of describing the knife from a use perspective, I talk about just generally how easy it is to carry, how easy it is to use, how comfortable and effective it is for all those things. Carry could be a little bit better. I don't need to go into too many details here. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Pocket clip has a decent amount of tension, and it has almost no ramp to it. You do, depending on the thickness of your pockets, you do find yourself kind of doing that thing where you gotta kind of shove it into your pocket at times. And then same thing, clearance underneath the clip really isn't that big. So if you're wearing thicker pants for whatever reason, you might kind of, you might fight with it here and there, getting it in and out of the pocket. Next up, jimping. Jimping is good, and the blade is good. The stock thickness is about 120 thousandths, 0.12 inches. That's actually really nice because a lot of knives that are this big, for some reason the manufacturers do that thing where they make the blade stock 160 thousandths, and they just don't cut well. They never, ever, ever cut well. Couple that with the fact that we've got a very tall, full flat grind, almost full flat grind. It's extremely tall, okay? It's a good slicer. I do actually like this knife for cutting. It reminds me a lot of my PM2. Finally, last but not least, in terms of ergos, this knife is like a solid 7 out of 10 for me in terms of ergos, and that's primarily because it's got a good shape, right? It's moderately neutral, but it's still got this swell. It's just got that shape, and it's big enough to where it fits almost anybody's hand. And because it's not locking you into any particular position, just most people are going to end up finding a way to like it. That being said, the entire knife is kind of a hot spot because of these sharp edges where the machining ends, right? So when you look along the entire edge of the knife, it is technically slightly angled, which is why you can kind of see a shadow here and a highlight here. But at the end of the day, that angle is very precise. It's very abrupt. And what that means is that as you bear down on this knife, even just grabbing it right now, I feel it on my index finger. I feel it on the tips of my fingers as they try to wrap around the back of the knife, and I feel it on the middle of my fingers as they wrap around this edge of the handle. So while it is a good cutter, I don't know if I would love beating on this thing all day long, because eventually this is going to wear on you. If you occasionally need a knife, then this is fine. If you want to use a knife as your exclusive tool that you work with all day long, might not necessarily recommend this one. Finally, in terms of carrying, you can see all that milling on the inside of there. This knife is actually extremely light relative to its size. Another issue knives that are this big usually have is that they're extremely heavy. This one is not. This one is actually extremely nimble. It was very unexpected, and that milling is also on the other side, although it's a little bit harder to see because of the lighting right now, but very aggressive milling on the inside of this knife. So that's what I'll say about this knife from a user perspective. From a fidgeting perspective, not going to focus too much on this because all we've got is a flipper tab here, and how I feel about it can be summed up pretty easily, and the things that cause it to feel a certain way can be pointed to relatively easily. Okay, so the flipper tab, relatively tiny, not the biggest thing in the world, but it's entirely downward sloping, and there's no jimping on top. What that means is that while you can light switch it, you feel your finger actually kind of like slipping away from it the whole time. And it almost gives you that feeling that you're going to fail the knife. Or it almost gives you that feeling like if you've ever slipped off of a knife, It really is. It's very finely polished. It's very slippery, and there's no jimping, and it's downward sloping. It just feels like it was meant to be push buttoned. That being said, even the push button doesn't really drive me too crazy, because in a good way, because there's just this one little piece where you've got some jimping, right, and it just gives you a little bit of grip. But there's not really a lot of purchase that you get here. There's not a lot of space right there to put your finger on. So it kind of digs into your finger as you push down on it. It's just not really there for me. Now, in terms of the action, in terms of how it feels, I have tuned this and I've gotten it to the point where I can basically give it a light shake and it'll fall shut with a shake or two. That being said, if you're an action snob, I will say something about this. It is not glassy. It is sandy. Let's do this. Maybe you can hear it. You'll understand. Oh, I'm bumping the camera here. Listen to me. Can you hear that? I'm just going to keep hitting my camera. Okay, there you go. It's got that sandy feel to it. So if you're someone who, really focuses on the action in all regards in terms of deployment, in terms of feel, this one might not do it for you, unless that's your preference, but I've never heard of someone saying that they prefer sandy to, say, glassy. So that's what I'll say. As a fidgeter, honestly, 3 out of 10? I don't know. 3 out of 10? It doesn't have a ton of options. The one that it does have doesn't feel amazing. And then even while you're just moving through that action, it's gritty instead of glassy. I have polished this, I have lubed it, I've done everything. That's just how it is. So that's what I have to say about this knife as a fidgeter. As a collector, not really interested in discussing geopolitical issues now, but I can't find any more of these anywhere on the internet at any legitimate online retailer. Lamnia was the company that was primarily selling all of the Cheburkov knives. I contacted them directly, and they said they will not be receiving any knives from anywhere in Russia for the foreseeable future, okay? So if you thought this was hard to get before, it's definitely hard to get now. Maybe try to find one on the secondary. That being said, I don't know, it makes it a little bit more exclusive. If you're someone who enjoys the chase, this might be something that is tempting for you, or it's something that you're drawn to. For me, I think it's I think there's enough here. I think Cheburkov makes unique enough knives. I think he makes elusive enough knives, and they're all individually different enough from each other, where if you wanted to buy one of every single knife that he made, you could probably get away with it, and you could probably be satisfied with it. Let's move on to will I be keeping this knife, and just how I feel about this knife overall. So for me, I probably will not be keeping this knife. It's not that it's bad. It's just that, after I got over the craze and the elusiveness and I finally got it in my hands, it just doesn't do anything that another knife in my collection doesn't already do. If you don't already have a knife in this price range, or if maybe you just want to have a Russian knife in your collection from a well-known Russian maker or something like that, maybe that's enough to bring you in. But for me, given that this knife typically runs after like shipping and things like that for anywhere between $450 to $550, I really never thought I would say this, but at that point, for me, I'd rather just have a Sebenza, to be quite honest with you, because at least the Sebenza does a few things like really, really, really well. Like in terms of the fit and finish, the Sebenza just continues to blow your mind. In terms of the action, it's got a very smooth, very good action, not drop shotty or anything like that, but you can just feel how well made this is, and it's just something about this is always going to be pleasing to some extent. For me, on this one, I personally don't see enough here for me to justify the $500. Now, they do consistently sell for that much, even on the secondary market. So, I mean, people want these things. People like these things. And some have compared them to Shirogorovs. I have not handled the Shirogorov, but in terms of the overall aesthetic, the lines, the design, I can see where people are coming from there. For me, I think this is one of those ones where it was really cool to experience it, but I'd rather just have my $500 back and go put it towards something else that's also, a little bit more exotic, little bit hard to get, something like that. Is it girlfriend approved? Everybody seems to get a kick out of this at this point. So, is it girlfriend approved? No, she didn't really like the action. She kept failing it a few times when she tried to flip it, and maybe it's because she's not used to putting a ton of effort into knives in terms of flipping them to open them. But she kept failing the flip, and she actually said she didn't like the texture of the titanium. This titanium has a kind of chalky texture as opposed to a more smooth, more refined texture, and she said it kind of gave her the chills as she was holding it. That being said, that's everything I have to say about the Cheburkov Scout. Definitely an interesting piece if you've wanted to just handle something that he has made. While we're here talking about that, before I let you go, I will say, since I have handled both and because I actually have this one here, personally, if you could get a hold of both of these, but you only had the money for one, I would definitely look into the small Striche, which I'm holding right now. Not even necessarily this version, but I can just tell you overall, the action on the Striche, it's very glassy. The Ergos, in my opinion, are better. It carries a little bit better. If you had to pick between these two just for the sake of acquiring a Cheburkov and experiencing one for the first time, I'd say go for the small Striche or even the large Striche. That's all I have for you guys today. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you next time.